The night was fierce, with rain hammering down in relentless sheets. Thunder rolled across the sky, and the wipers on John's old truck worked overtime against the storm. He squinted through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel tightly as his tires splashed through water pooling on the slick road. The storm was unforgiving, and every mile home felt like a test of endurance. As he rounded a bend, the faint glow of hazard lights flickered in the distance. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the stranded vehicle on the roadside. The silver screen legend stood beside the car, waving his arms frantically as the rain soaked his coat. The scene was chaotic, desperate. John didn't hesitate. He slowed his truck, his heart pounding as he pulled over. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the downpour. The rain was icy, soaking him to the bone within seconds. Each step squelched in the mud as he approached the silver screen legend. "Are you okay?" John shouted over the roar of the storm. The silver screen legend, his face pale and hair plastered to his cheeks, shook his head. "The car won't start. I've been stuck here for over an hour." John quickly assessed the situation, his mechanic instincts kicking in. He popped the hood and shone his flashlight over the engine, rainwater dripping onto the machinery. A quick check revealed the issue: a dead battery. "I can jump start it," he said. "Stay in the car where it's warm." The silver screen legend nodded, his voice shaking. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would stop." John worked swiftly, connecting the jumper cables from his truck to the stranded car, his hands steady despite the cold. Sparks flew briefly, and the car sputtered to life. Relief washed over the silver screen legend's face. "You're a lifesaver," he exclaimed, his gratitude breaking through the rain's relentless noise. John waved off his thanks with a tired smile. "Just pay it forward someday," he said simply. As the silver screen legend drove away, his headlights cutting through the storm, John stood in the rain, watching him disappear into the night. Something about the encounter lingered in his mind, though he couldn't quite place why. John lived a simple, hard-working life. Every day he woke before sunrise, pulling on his grease-stained overalls and heading to the garage where he worked. His small town wasn't anything special, but it was home, and the garage was where he spent most of his waking hours. From oil changes to complex engine repairs, John handled it all. His hands, calloused and rough from years of labor, told the story of his life. The garage was loud, filled with the clanging of tools and the rumble of engines. But it was also lonely. Customers came and went, often without so much as a thank you. For John, this was routine, hard work, little recognition, and just enough pay to scrape by. At home, his life mirrored the simplicity of his work. His modest house sat on the edge of town, its roof showing signs of wear from years of neglect. The lawn was overgrown, but John didn't mind. His evenings were spent fixing things around the house or falling asleep in front of an old TV. He didn't complain. Life wasn't easy, but he was used to it. Despite his struggles, John was the kind of man who couldn't ignore someone in need. He'd stop to help a neighbor fix their fence or assist a stranded motorist on the highway. It wasn't about recognition or reward. It was just who he was. That rainy evening, as John drove home, he reflected on how ordinary his life was. The rain pounded against the roof of his truck, and the rhythmic sound of the wipers filled the silence. His body ached from the day's work, but he took solace in the thought of getting home, eating a simple meal, and collapsing into bed. But his thoughts kept returning to the silver screen legend on the side of the road. There had been something in his eyes, a mix of desperation and gratitude, that stayed with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that stopping to help him had been the right thing to do, even if it had delayed his trip home. John had no way of knowing how much that small act of kindness would come to mean. As he pulled into his driveway, the rain still pouring, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever see the silver screen legend again. The next morning, John was back at the garage, wiping grease off his hands as he prepared for another long day. The familiar hum of machinery filled the air, and the smell of oil and rubber clung to his overalls. It was just another day, or so he thought. Midway through replacing a truck's spark plugs, John's phone buzzed in his pocket. He frowned, pulling it out with a grease-streaked hand. It was his neighbor, and her voice on the other end was frantic. "John, you need to get home right now," she exclaimed. John stiffened. "What's going on?" "There's a helicopter landed right in front of your house. A big one. There are people in suits everywhere. John's heart skipped a beat. A helicopter? At his house? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was there an emergency? Had something gone wrong? I'll be right there, he said, hanging up and grabbing his jacket. He left the garage in a hurry, his boots crunching against the gravel as he climbed into his old truck. The drive home felt like an eternity. Questions swirled in his mind, each one more bewildering than the last. Helicopters didn't just land in small towns like his, especially not in front of his house. What could this possibly mean? As he turned onto his street, his breath caught in his throat. There it was, a sleek black helicopter parked right in front of his modest home. The machine gleamed under the morning sun, its blades still. A group of people in tailored suits stood nearby, their expressions unreadable. John parked his truck and stepped out cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. The sound of his door closing echoed louder than he expected, breaking the tense silence. Before he could say a word, one of the suited men approached him, his expression calm yet professional. "Mr. Thompson?" the man asked, his voice smooth and measured. John nodded slowly. "That's me." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "We're here on behalf of someone you helped a few days ago. The Silver Screen Legend asked us to deliver this personally." John's brow furrowed as he accepted the envelope. The weight of the paper felt heavier than it should have. With slightly trembling hands, he tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. The message was brief but left him stunned. "Thank you for your kindness. Please come with us." John looked up, his mouth dry. "Who sent this?" The man smiled faintly. "The Silver Screen Legend." John climbed into the helicopter, his heart pounding. The rumble of the engines filled his ears as the machine lifted off the ground, the familiar sight of his neighborhood growing smaller below. He stared out the window, his mind spinning with questions. Why had the Silver Screen Legend sent for him? What could he possibly want? The flight was short, but every second felt heavy with anticipation. As they approached their destination, the view below shifted dramatically. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, dotted with perfectly manicured gardens and sparkling fountains. In the middle of it all stood a massive estate, its sheer size and elegance making John's jaw drop. The helicopter descended smoothly onto a private landing pad, the blades whipping the surrounding grass into a frenzy. John's pulse quickened as the suited man who had accompanied him gestured for him to follow. "This way," the man said, leading him toward the mansion. John stepped out, his boots crunching against the pristine gravel driveway. The air smelled of fresh flowers and faintly of rain, a stark contrast to the grease and oil he was used to. As they approached the front doors, towering and made of carved oak, John felt a wave of nerves. The doors swung open, revealing an interior that was nothing short of breathtaking. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with ornate paintings. Every detail screamed luxury, and John couldn't help but feel out of place. The man led him through a series of hallways, each more extravagant than the last. They passed rooms with towering bookshelves, grand pianos, and vases that looked more expensive than John's entire house. Finally, they arrived at a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sprawling garden. The sunlight streamed in, casting a warm glow on the polished floors. Standing by the window, dressed in an elegant navy suit, was the Silver Screen Legend, a man whose presence radiated the charisma and charm of a Hollywood star. John froze. The Silver Screen Legend looked entirely different from the man he had helped in the rain. Gone was the drenched coat and frazzled demeanor. He was composed, confident, and radiated an air of authority. "John," the Silver Screen Legend said, his voice calm but warm. "I've been waiting for you." He hesitated, taking a step forward. "The Silver Screen Legend. What is all this? Why am I here?" The Silver Screen Legend smiled, though his expression held a seriousness that made John's stomach tighten. "Because you did something remarkable," he said. "You helped me when you didn't have to, without asking for anything in return. That's a rare quality." John glanced around the room, still struggling to process the enormity of the situation. "But this?" He gestured vaguely at the grandeur around him. "It doesn't make sense." The Silver Screen Legend stepped closer, his heels clicking softly against the floor. "It will," he said. "But first let me show you something." He motioned for John to follow, leading him to a small table at the center of the room. On it sat an envelope and a set of keys, both resting on a polished wooden tray. John stared at them, his heart pounding. "What's this?" he asked quietly. "This," the silver screen legend began, "is a token of my gratitude. But it's more than that. It's an opportunity." John's eyes shifted between the envelope and the keys, his chest tightening as a wave of disbelief washed over him. "An opportunity?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. The silver screen legend nodded, his expression serious but kind. "That night in the rain, you didn't hesitate. You stopped to help me when no one else did. That act of kindness was rare, and it reminded me of something I had forgotten, the value of selflessness." John's hands trembled as he picked up the envelope, the weight of it heavier than he expected. He opened it slowly, his breath catching when he saw what was inside. A check. The amount was staggering, more money than he had ever seen in his life. "This can give you the financial freedom you deserve," the silver screen legend explained, his tone gentle. "No more worrying about bills, no more sleepless nights wondering how to make ends meet." John shook his head, struggling to find words. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why would you do this for me?" The silver screen legend smiled faintly. "Because people like you deserve to be noticed. You didn't stop to help me because you expected anything in return. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That kind of integrity is rare, John." He gestured toward the keys. "These are for the car parked outside. It's yours. Consider it a small upgrade from your truck." John's mind raced as he tried to process everything. The money, the car. It was overwhelming. "This is too much," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't accept it." The silver screen legend stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You can," he said firmly, "and you should. But that's not all I'm offering." John blinked, confusion flashing across his face. "There's more?" The silver screen legend nodded. "I have a position available. It's not just a job. It's a chance to work alongside me, to use your skills in ways you never imagined. I've seen your work, John. You're talented, dedicated, and resourceful. Those are qualities I need on my team." John stared at him, his thoughts spinning. "What kind of work?" he asked cautiously. "It's challenging but rewarding," the silver screen legend replied. "You'd be helping to manage the operations of my estate, assisting with projects that make a difference in people's lives. It's a step into a new world, one where your kindness and skills can have a lasting impact." The weight of his words settled on him. This wasn't just an offer. It was a life-changing decision. The thought of leaving his routine, his garage, and the life he'd known was daunting. But the idea of stepping into something new, something meaningful, stirred a spark of hope within him. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like this," John admitted, his voice uncertain. The silver screen legend placed a hand on his shoulder, his touch reassuring. "You don't have to decide now," he said softly. "Take your time. Think it over. But know this, John, you're worth it. You've already changed my life. Let me help change yours." John sat alone in his modest living room, the envelope and keys resting on the worn coffee table in front of him. The room was silent, save for the occasional creak of the house settling. His gaze lingered on the check, the zeros staring back at him like a challenge. His mind was a storm of emotions. On one hand, the money represented a chance to leave behind the constant struggle that had defined his life. No more late-night worries about paying bills. No more exhausting shifts at the garage. On the other hand, accepting it felt almost too good to be true, as if it would come with a price he couldn't foresee. He leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. "Why me?" he muttered to himself. "I just fixed his car. That's all." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about fixing a car. The silver screen legend had seen something in him, something that he often overlooked in himself, his quiet determination, his willingness to help without expectation. Yet the weight of his generosity pressed heavily on him. Over the next few days, John tried to carry on with his routine, hoping to find clarity. At the garage, the familiar clang of tools and hum of engines provided some distraction, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the silver screen legend's offer. Every moment of silence seemed to echo with the possibilities he had laid before him. On one particularly quiet evening, John sat on his porch, the envelope in his hands again, unopened since that first day. Slowly, he peeled it open and unfolded the check. The sheer amount of money still took his breath away. Alongside it was a handwritten note from the silver screen legend. It read, "John, this is just the beginning. Your kindness changed my life, and I hope this helps change yours. The choice is yours. Whether you decide to stay as you are or take a step into something new, I'll always be grateful for what you did." He ran his fingers over the words, the sincerity of the message tugging at his heart. The decision wasn't just about the money or the job. It was about stepping into a new version of himself, one that he wasn't sure he was ready for. As the stars began to fill the sky, John made a quiet promise to himself. He would think this through carefully. He wouldn't rush, but he wouldn't let fear hold him back either. Days passed, but the decision weighed heavily on John's mind. Every moment he found himself thinking about the silver screen legend's offer. The idea of leaving behind his routine was both thrilling and terrifying. His life had been defined by hard work and modest living. Was he ready to let that go? One morning, as the sun began to rise over the small town, John woke with an unusual sense of clarity. The doubts that had clouded his mind seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet determination. He reached for the card the silver screen legend had given him, the edges slightly worn from handling it so many times. Taking a deep breath, he dialed the number. His hands trembled as the line rang, and then a familiar voice answered. "The silver screen legend," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I've made my decision. I'm ready." A few days later, the helicopter returned. This time, it didn't feel like an overwhelming spectacle, but a symbol of a new beginning. John climbed aboard with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The flight over the town felt different now. He wasn't leaving something behind. He was stepping towards something entirely new. When they landed at the estate, the silver screen legend was waiting for him. His smile was warm, his posture confident. "Welcome back, John," he said. "Are you ready to get started?" John nodded. "I think so. I'll admit, this still feels unreal." "You'll adjust," the silver screen legend assured him, "and I'll be here to guide you every step of the way." The work was unlike anything John had ever done. At first, the scale of the projects the silver screen legend introduced him to was overwhelming. Managing operations for the estate meant dealing with logistics, overseeing staff, and even assisting with charitable initiatives the silver screen legend funded. It was a world apart from fixing engines in a garage, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Over time, John discovered talents he didn't know he had. His problem-solving skills, honed from years of working with cars, translated seamlessly into this new role. He became a trusted part of the Silver Screen Legends team, valued not just for his work ethic, but for his integrity and dedication. One day, as John finished overseeing a particularly challenging project, the Silver Screen Legend approached him. "How are you feeling about everything?" he asked. John paused, looking out over the estate's gardens. "It's a lot," he admitted, "but it feels good. For the first time, I feel like I'm making a real difference." The Silver Screen Legend nodded. "You are, and that's why I wanted you here. People like you don't just fix cars, John. They fix lives. You reminded me of that the day you stopped to help me." As the weeks turned into months, John settled into his new life. The mansion no longer felt intimidating, and the work no longer felt out of reach. He had found a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. One evening, as the sun set over the estate, John stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The cool breeze brushed against his face, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. Everything had changed because of one small act of kindness. That rainy night, when he stopped to help the Silver Screen Legend, he couldn't have imagined where it would lead. Now, as he stood in a place he once thought was beyond his reach, John understood the true power of compassion and generosity. John leaned on the railing of the balcony, watching as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon. The gardens below were bathed in a warm, golden glow, and the sound of a gentle breeze rustling through the trees filled the air. This moment of peace felt almost surreal, a stark contrast to the life he had known just months ago. His thoughts drifted back to the rainy night that had set everything in motion. It had seemed so insignificant at the time. Just another evening, just another stranded car on the roadside. But stopping to help the silver screen legend had been the start of something he couldn't have foreseen. John realized now how much one simple act of kindness could ripple outward, changing not just one life, but many. The work he was doing alongside the silver screen legend went beyond the walls of the estate. Together they were funding projects that supported struggling communities, offering opportunities to people who, like him, had once felt stuck in their circumstances. He thought about the garage, the long hours he'd spent fixing engines and scraping by. That life, though challenging, had shaped him into the person the silver screen legend had recognized: hardworking, humble, and kind. He smiled faintly, realizing that even in the hardest times, he had carried the values that had brought him here. As the sky turned from gold to deep indigo, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. This new life wasn't just about the money or the opportunities, it was about the meaning behind it all. He had found a purpose he hadn't known he was searching for, and it all began with one choice: to stop and help someone in need. Kindness has a way of coming full circle, he thought to himself. You never know where it might lead. The stars began to emerge, dotting the sky like tiny beacons of hope. John took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill his lungs. His journey had been anything but ordinary, but he wouldn't have changed a single moment of it.